Good Monday morning and welcome back to the Brother Main podcast. I do want to say that I hope it's a good morning, a blessed morning coming off of the weekend, that you were able to find that respite or rest or find that excitement, and get out to the clubs or, meet up with Bae or that boo thing and, have a nice dinner or a date, Netflix and chill. However you spent your weekend, that it was a blessed occasion for you and the people that you were surrounded by, and that you're moving into an energetic, fast-paced, rewarding week ahead. That you're waking up upbeat and motivated. You're having that coffee or that smoothie. You're getting in the gym. You're getting active and really, getting out there and broadening your horizons all week. I want to speak life and love and light into every area and facet of your being, and just overall wellness in your mind, spirit, body, and soul. Friday's podcast was on wealth, and I do hope you guys enjoyed it. For those of you who are my returning listeners, a special word of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for your continued support. Those of you who are new to the Brother Main podcast, welcome. What we do on the Brother Main podcast is we discuss esoteric concepts, some world or current events, some personal experiences, and all of the episodes are available on the Brother Main podcast homepage. So I do encourage you to listen at your convenience. But this morning we're going to discuss the idea of appropriation. Another prevalent topic in the modern day. The idea of appropriation, you'll find as we move through this podcast where we cite examples in history of appropriation, but it's definitely very prevalent in the modern day. So I do want to take some time this morning to discuss it, some food for thought. In the Brotherhood of Man, of course, we do everything with a reason, and we break everything down into its simplest parts in order to discuss a particular topic. So today, the idea is of cultural appropriation specifically. So we're going to start by defining both of those terms, appropriation and culture. We'll start with the definition of culture. Right? Culture is going to be the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. That's one definition for culture. Another definition is the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. Examples of culture would be vernacular, slang, lingo. If you talk with us in a specific way, a specific culture talks in a specific way. It could be also dress and wardrobe. For instance, Chicano style in Los Angeles, the Latino culture that imbibes Chicano style, or hood, urban styles that you'll find in the hoods of Chicago or my hometown, Atlanta, or mafia dress, the Italian suits, loafers, black leather jackets, or a particular music style, and we'll cite that later again for a historical example. But those are examples of culture. When we talk about appropriation, we then have another set of definitions. The first one being the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. Okay? It's the first definition. The second definition is going to be a sum of money or total of assets devoted to a special purpose, right? So that'd be kind of when we think of like ways and means, appropriation, right? So two definitions there. So if you put them together, having broken them down into their simplest parts, let's put them together now. Cultural appropriation then would be the action of taking or using someone or some groups, arts and other manifestations, which can include social institutions, achievements, etc., for one's own use, and that'd be typically without that person or group's permission. That'd be one definition of cultural appropriation. Another definition of cultural appropriation would be a sum of money or total assets devoted to someone or some group's arts and other manifestations, including social institutions, achievements, or etc. Right? So hopefully that clarifies this concept of cultural appropriation a little bit more when we talk about this topic, right? So what are some examples, if we move forward, what are some examples of cultural appropriation, right? It would be maybe in the music industry, for instance, with particular artists that will remain unnamed, and the genre of rock and roll. Now, if you've done any history on the the idea or concept of rock and roll, it would have actually roots prior. Rooted in the African American community. What was going on during that time was a racial divide, of course, especially within this country, wherein which African American music artists, of course, were not allowed to participate fully in distribution, in distributing their music, right? At least even to their own demographic. They weren't able to get into the music studios and represent their cultures, but their music was still desirable by another demographic that kind of exploited their contributions and benefited off of them. And then it would be sans or without, showing them the appreciation for where they derived that music from, right? So what I'm led to believe is that the appropriation, or the cultural appropriation that we talked about mostly in the modern day, where it has this negative connotation, right, has to do with the fact of appropriating something or someone's culture without then demonstrating the appreciation. There has to be emphasis placed on a lack of appreciation or showing that appreciation for that culture. For instance, if African American gentlemen, wanted to depict, for instance, Latino culture, right? And really delved into that topic, or had, a basis in his childhood where he grew up, with undergoing specific plight that particular culture would more prevalently have encountered, but showed appreciation. The question is begged whether that would be appropriation if he wanted to then immerse himself in a positive way, more so into that culture and those peoples. Where do we draw the line between cultural appropriation, of course, with a negative connotation, and the idea of simply appreciating a culture for its values? So I'm reminded of another contemporary example, and this would be a shout out to her, and her name is Awkwafina, the subject of a lot of controversy in the modern day for her work. Not only that, but for the idea of cultural appropriation with a negative connotation, which I'm here this morning to defend Miss Awkwafina. So that'll be pretty interesting. But we're talking about that idea of cultural appropriation, again, as opposed to appreciating a culture genuinely. Now, Miss Awkwafina was accused of using, black scent, where black scent is African, it would be the African-American typical urban vernacular slang or lingo, the inflection and the cadence within our voice. I'm a black man, and how we regularly talk, at least within our own immediate demographic, right? So she actually came out and made a couple statements here. I'm going to go through them. This would be February 7th, 2022. So early last year, Ms. Awkwafina acknowledged that black culture has been stolen, exploited, and appropriated by the dominant culture for monetary gain without acknowledgement nor respect for where those roots came from, the pioneers of its beginnings, and the artists that perfected and mastered the craft. So pretty poignant statement, right? Especially going through that condemnation, right? To come out and make this statement, I think that kind of speaks for itself. Although, in the modern day, you got a lot of people coming out and making statements on things that without that authenticity. I don't know. I'm a man of vibes. I'm a man of feeling things out for whether or not they're authentic or genuine. And I just feel like the vibe I'm getting here is that, she's acknowledging what has been the issue for quite some time, even above her contribution, if there should be any deemed as such, to the idea of the African American culture being exploited, hitting it head on and tackling this issue. Now, Miss Awkwafina, whose real name is Nora Lunn, right? She tweeted that there is a socio-political context to everything, especially the historical context of the African American community in this country. Awkwafina clarified her use of AAVE, now that would be African American Vernacular English, was a result of being first generation American. She's half Korean and half Chinese. So this idea of the appreciation would then be rooted in, for an adult, would be rooted in a particular upbringing, right? Because if she grew up, everyone has problems, right? But if she grew up in geographical location, right? And we're going to get to that, where she would have more so encountered the specific facets of the plight of that demographic, then I would think it would hint more towards appreciation, right? Either subconscious or conscious, right? This black scent, is it subconsciously happening or is it consciously happening? Either way, an appreciation as opposed to the idea of culturally appropriating. Now, when she talks to her about her immigrant background, she says this: my immigrant background allowed me to carve an American identity off the movies and TV shows I watched, the children I went to public school with, right? So emphasis on that, and my undying love and respect for hip hop. I think as a group, Asian Americans are still trying to figure out what that journey means for them, what is correct and where they don't belong. And though I'm still learning and doing that personal work, I know for sure that I want to spend the rest of my career doing nothing but uplifting our communities. We do this first by failing, learning, acknowledging, hearing, and empathizing, and I will continue tirelessly to do just that. So again, another very head-on statement, not avoiding or dodging the issue, with a vibe of authenticity. That I feel like it was just this miscommunication or, misunderstanding of the reasoning behind the potential source of cultural appropriation. Now, a little history on Miss Awkwafina. She was born in Stony Brook, Long Island. So I did a little bit of research here. I'm not too familiar with Long Island, but this would be a shout out to my homie, DJ Cyrus, aka Calvin Jervis. He is actually from New York, Long Island area, Freeport. And I grew up with him, and I know he's gone through extensive, things in his life that would be particular to that specific geographical location, but just in general, he's a real dude, and he's been through a lot of things. Kudos to him for making a great success of his life so far, and hopefully he stays on that path, and we're praying for that. But he's doing great things, magnanimous things right now, and it's great work that he does. But yeah, no, so that's the extent of what I know about it. But in terms of Miss Awkwafina, she again is a first generation, Asian American, and although she was born in Stony Brook, right, she grew up actually in Forest Hill, Queens. Now, I'm not familiar with Queens at all, but from what I've heard, it's more of this urban environment, and she attended Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School, right, and for her, her personality at an adolescent age, 15, she definitely was, this is her quote, she definitely was a person who was repressed, quiet and more passive. Here's a fun fact. I'll just interject with a fun fact here. Forest Hills is actually the childhood home of Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. So it's a shout out to him out there. Which one do you shout out, Tom Holland or Tobey Maguire. I'm going to shout out both of them, you know? But yeah, most definitely. Word up to Peter Parker, word up to Spider-Man. Anyone who's played them, you know, I love Spider-Man. But yeah, no, that's the childhood home of the friendly neighborhood Spidey Man, okay? But yeah, I just want to, close by saying there, of course, is an idea, again, when we speak of, blackface or black scent or, Chicano culture, being, in parts of, I believe, Japan, there's this massive Chicano culture, where they ride lowriders and they wear their, checkered shirts and bandanas and all that stuff, and they look like Chicanos. And I watched the whole documentary on it relatively recently, and I got no bad vibes. What I was seeing there wasn't really, I believe what I was seeing there was appropriation. I feel like we're too quick in the modern day to jump to this idea of you're appropriating my culture, and then ultimately with a negative regard. If it's simply, hey man, I love your culture, then there would be an appreciation. I put it into a realistic perspective. If, for instance, a Latino man came up to me and said, you know what, Nick? I grew up in Kingston. I'm not from there, but I grew up in Kingston. I love beef patties. I genuinely love Bob Marley music. And weed is my shit, guy. What do you think about that, mi amigo? I would say, mi amigo, keep on with the keeping on, man. That's a great thing, as a full-blooded Jamaican myself, I wouldn't immediately get anything wrong with that. If he said, you know what, Nick, Theta, I want to then even furthermore immerse myself in your culture. Can I do that in your presence? Can I do that? Are you going to say I'm appropriating your culture? I even want dreadlocks. I want to be fully Latino Rasta today. I'd be like, hey man, what we need to do is make the jerk chicken burritos is what we need to do. With the birria consomme. I would love that, my friend. We need to then completely blend our cultures is what I'm getting at. So ending with the joke here, and I do want to just go ahead and say again, thank you so much for your continued support. It is unfathomable sometimes when I think about, how some of you guys are dedicated to everything that the Brotherhood of Maine does, all of its endeavors, my writing and things like that. Those were truly in my corner. And thank you from the bottom, inside, top, every corner of my heart. And I make every stride to reciprocate that notion. If you are out there and I truly support you, I go to the furthest extent. If you know anything about Theta, he goes to the furthest extent to express that gratitude, that appreciation for what it is you do, and that sincere interest, that sincere support for you and your perspective and what you bring to society each and every day. And as days go by, it adds up. Those are hours and days and weeks spent. Time is money. So Theta is doing that for you in the best way that he knows how to. Ultimately for the higher being, God, who is above all and watching all of our actions all of the time. So I want to leave off with this. Appropriate God, or you might find appropriate God's perspective of your culture and the cultures that surround you. If you do so, you might be led to appropriate funds towards the cultures you more so appreciate, and thusly demonstrate a love more profound than if you remain secluded and repressed, quiet and passive, learning to share with the widest demographic an array of beneficial inclinations as it pertains to the idea of unity and goodwill. Thank you for listening to the Brother Main podcast, and blessings from the Brother Main.